Hi and welcome back to High Finance Graduate. In this video, we are going to go over the most important thing which you have to prepare for your investment banking interview, and that is the technical section. Almost 80% of candidates fail their interviews not because they're not smart or they don't have enough experience or anything like that, but it's because they don't know how to answer the technical section of their interviews. So in this video, I'm going to go over the 7 categories of technical questions which you have to know in order to ace your investment banking interviews, as well as going over 33 of the most common questions which you're almost guaranteed to get asked. So regardless if you're going to be applying for an analyst or an associate or even an internship role, you are almost guaranteed to get asked these questions. And at the end of this video, we are also going to take a look at the common issues which almost every candidate face. So for example, what do you do if you don't know the answer? Or if you only know half of the answer? Or how many questions do you need to get right in order to pass your interview? Or how do you know if you've done good or bad? Or are there any specific questions which you need to know for specific departments in investment banking? We are going to go over all of those issues at the end of this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Okay, so let's start with the first category of question, which is a finance question. Now, since you're going to go in a finance role, then you should expect to get general finance questions during your interviews. You should comfortably be able to talk about the net present value formulas, and be able to talk about the relationship between bond pricing and interest rates, and be able to talk about internal rate of return and NPVs, as well as understand a firm's typical capital structure, and the pros and cons of issuing debt versus capital. So let's take a look at some actual interview questions. Why is money today worth more than money tomorrow? Tell me about a typical firm's capital structure. If interest rates rises, what would happen to the price of bonds? If a candidate is able to answer basic finance questions, then we can move on to more intermediate questions. So the candidate should comfortably be able to talk about the capital asset pricing model, CAPM, the weighted average cost of capital, the internal rate of return formulas, and common valuation multiples, so PE multiples. And you should also understand why issuing debt is far less expensive than issuing equity. So example interview questions are: what are some advantages and disadvantages of issuing stock? What is a discount rate and how do you estimate it? Why is the cost of capital U-shaped? If a candidate can answer basic and intermediate questions, then we will move on to more advanced questions. And it's really important that you are able to answer this if you really want to impress your interviewers. So here you're going to get asked questions on the topic of enterprise value and equity value and the adjustments to go from one and the other, as well as more complex questions on the topic of capital structures. How can two companies with identical earnings in the same industry but yet have different PE multiples? How do you get from equity value to enterprise value? Now, there are a few more questions which you can get asked on the finance section, as well as different variations of the questions which we just went over. And again, if you do want more help, then check out our recruitment guide. So now let's move on to the second category of technical questions which you have to know, which is accounting questions. Now, I've said this once and I've said this twice, you do not need to be an accountant to be an investment banker. But you do need to know how to read financial statements and basic accounting treatments, because as a junior investment banker, as an analyst or an associate, you are going to be dealing with financial statements, building financial models based on financial statements on a near day-to-day basis. So it's very important that you understand how accounting treatment works for specific adjustments, for specific statements and specific line items. And in order for you to impress your interviewer, it's very important that you get all of the accounting questions correct. Some of the more basic questions are going to be on what is a financial statement, what is an income statement or balance sheet. Now, those are very rare questions, but not unheard of. More common basic questions are going to be on identifying a specific line item on the financial statement and explaining what they are. So for example, what are COGS? Or walking your interviewer through a specific adjustment on all of the 3 financial statements. So where would you place XX on the financial statement? Or walk me through the impact of depreciation increasing by $10 on the 3 financial statements. And this doesn't just have to be depreciation, it could be inventory, it could be accounts receivable, accounts payable, it could be a range of things. But those are some of the most common questions which you have to prepare for. But more intermediate questions are going to be on the impacts and effects of leases, asset write-downs, tax implications, financial adjustments, and scenario-based questions. So for example, if a company wishes to use an accelerated depreciation method, so taking $20 per year instead of the usual $10, walk me through the adjustments on the financial statements. What is the impact of an asset write-down on the 3 financial statement? Give me some examples of non-recurring items on the balance sheet. How does a deferred tax liability or asset arise? Accounting questions are going to get asked to every single candidate, regardless of your background, and it's imperative that you are able to answer all of those questions. But if you are from an accounting background, then you can expect to get far more advanced questions on the topic of GAAP and subtle differentiation between international standards and specific adjustments from time periods. But for the vast majority of candidates, you should be able to answer all of the basic and intermediate questions comfortably. So let's move on to the third category of questions which you have to prepare for, which is valuation and financial modeling. If you're applying to a private equity firm or even a small investment banking boutique, then you may be asked to build a financial model as part of your interview. And that's going to form the technical section of your interviews. But if you're applying at a bulge bracket bank or even the majority of boutique banks, then the types of questions that you're going to get asked on this category, it's not going to go beyond basic. And it's only if you're trying to really impress your interviewer, really stand out, that's when you have to try and know more intermediate type of questions. But don't worry, we are going to take a look at both sets of questions. So from a basic standpoint, you have to know the 3 main valuation methodologies which pretty much everyone in investment banking knows. And that's DCF, comparables analysis, and present transactions. You have to be able to walk your interviewer through each of them. So a very common question is, walk me through a DCF. Now, if you're trying to impress your interviewer and really stand out, then prepare for intermediate questions. And again, you are only going to get this type of question if you have demonstrated that you have learned financial modeling, or if you have some financial modeling or valuation experience on your resume. And again, you are going to get asked more intermediate questions if that's the case. So you are going to have to learn how to build an LBO model, an M&A model, and you're going to get tested on the pros and cons of different valuation methodologies and the specific technical requirements of each of them. So for example, why do we use unlevered free cash flow? Why do you lever and unlever beta? Give me the formula for levering and unlevering beta. Why do we calendarize financials and why is this important during a DCF? What are the advantages and disadvantages of the 3 main valuation methods? So now let's move on to the 4th category, which is mergers and acquisition questions. And for this one, you are far more likely to get intermediate types of questions if you're applying for an associate role, and just basic questions if you're applying for an analyst role. But that said, everything is fair game during an interview, and it's better to prepare for everything than to fail your interview because you didn't know that one question. So basic questions will revolve around the topic of synergy, why companies merge with other companies, the motives, the tactics which a company can use to protect itself from a hostile takeover, and walking your interviewer through a merger model. So let's take a look at some common investment banking interview questions around this. Why might one company want to buy another company? Walk me through the role of an investment banker on a sell-side M&A deal. What are some defense tactics a company can employ to detract hostile takeovers? Now, for intermediate questions and arguably more common questions, then you should prepare for scenario-based questions. So for example, if company A with a PE multiple of X acquires company B with a PE multiple of Z in an all-share transaction, is the deal going to be accretive or dilutive? You have to prepare for those scenario-based questions, because if you are a good candidate and if you are demonstrating good knowledge on investment banking, then you are far more likely going to get asked those types of questions as opposed to just basic questions. And for intermediate questions, you should also prepare for specific balance sheet adjustments whenever you're creating an M&A model. And finally, if you really want to impress your interviewer and stand out, then you should be able to talk about the pros and cons of a deal either being issued in all cash or shares or even a mixture of the two. So let's take a look at some example interview questions. What are some of the pros and cons of a cash versus asset purchase? Why would a company with a PE multiple of 15 want to acquire a company with a PE multiple of 8.5? Okay, so now let's move on to LBO questions. And given that a lot of investment banking clients happens to be private equity firms, it's very important that junior bankers know exactly how private equity firms value companies and how they see things. So basic questions here are pretty rare, but you can pretty much get questions around why would a company or why would a private equity firm or financial sponsor use leverage to buy a company? Those are pretty rare. But more common questions here are going to be walk me through an LBO, as well as what makes an attractive LBO target. Intermediate questions are going to revolve around the topic of scenario-based questions, as well as the different types of debt which are typically used to finance an LBO transactions, and knowing some of the specifics about them. So whether it's a long-term debt, mezzanine debt, PIK, the different types of covenants. And you should also know how to measure the profitability or the return of a potential LBO deal and know the specific metrics which are used, so internal rate of return and money on money multiples. So let's take a look at some common interview questions here. How might we increase the internal rate of return or money on money multiple in an LBO deal? What are some due diligence considerations when structuring a deal? If you really want to impress your interviewer and demonstrate your superior knowledge on the private equity world and the LBO side of things, then check out our recruitment guide for private equity, where we pretty much break down the whole process of investment banks and private equity structuring a deal from A to Z, as well as everything which goes in between. Okay, so now let's move on to the sixth category of questions which you can get asked, and that is going to be based on economics and current affairs. And this is the one area which a lot of candidates tend to underestimate, but it's something which can easily be fixed. Before your interview, make sure you go on the Wall Street Journal online, Bloomberg online, and the FT online, and just read everything, all the major headlines, and just keep track of some of the major news items which are developing on the news, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's economics, or whether it's any type of stability around the world which is going to affect a specific industry or sector. Again, these are major headline news. You don't need to read everything there. Now, there are no common interview questions here, and you could pretty much get asked anything, whether it's geopolitical or economic. So for example, one of the interview that I had, I was asked to name all 27 European presidents, and I could only name 5. Now, I wanted to ask my interviewer if he knew it, but I knew that was going to be an automatic rejection because no one wants to be humiliated, and I doubt the fact that even he knew all 27. But again, if you want a sign that your interviewer hates you, then this is probably it. If they ask you really weird, bizarre questions here, then it's probably because they want you to fail. But just again, keep in mind, before you go into your interview, you should check out the price of oil, the price of basic commodities and basic indices, and just read the major headlines. You could get asked, is Trump's policy good? Or do you think central banks should increase rates? Why? Or do you think governments should increase taxes or decrease taxes, and why? And how that's going to impact the business world and potentially the investment banking industry. So you should always try to relate everything to the global markets and how that is going to impact the appetite for mergers and acquisitions, IPO dealing, and general investment banking appetite. Now, for those of you with the investment banking interview and recruitment guide, make sure you check out the first section before you head out to your interview, where we cover the economics and current event sections. And we do tend to update that quite frequently, so again, we do try to keep up to date with current affairs and try to come up with everything that they can possibly ask you. So now let's move on to brain teasers. Now, I know some candidates completely dread this section, but it's a part of the interview and it's something that is pretty easy once you know exactly how to deal with it. Now, typically speaking, interviewers have a list of 20 brain teasers which they typically ask, and they don't tend to deviate from that list. And you can pretty much get all of those questions at the back of the investment banking interview and recruitment guide. So let's take a look at some common examples. What is the angle between the 1 hour hand and the minute hand of a clock at 3:15? What is the sum of numbers from 1 to 100? If I give you a 3-gallon jug and a 5-gallon jug, how do you use them to get 4 gallons of water? Now again, brain teasers, they're pretty much common, but the good news is everyone just regurgitates and recycles the same types of questions. So you can pretty much find them in our recruitment guide, and you should pretty much just memorize the answers and you should be fine. And if you do get a random question, again, just walk through it with your interviewer and try to gauge their facial expression if you're going wrong or if you're going the right way. So now that we've gone over 33 of the most common technical investment banking interview questions that almost everyone is guaranteed to get whenever they're going to go for their first round investment banking interview, now let's move on to common issues which a lot of candidates face. So one of the most common questions that I get is, how many questions can you get wrong and still pass your interview? And the reality is there is no fixed number. There is no 1 or 2 questions you can get wrong. It really does depend on the level of questions which you're being asked and the interviewer. If you're being asked really technical, advanced questions, and if you get 1 or 2 wrong, then it's okay. As long as it's a junior level role, as long as you've aced your basic and intermediate questions, then it's not going to heavily impact the overall view of you. But if you are getting questions wrong from the basic or intermediate section, then it is a red flag, because it means that you haven't taken the time to prepare for the investment banking interview, you haven't spoken to bankers, and you don't know how to even prepare for the interview. And it pretty much shows that you're not entirely invested in investment banking, because if you were invested and if you really want a career in investment banking, then you would have taken the time to research and prepare for the interview. For those of you with the investment banking interview and recruitment guide, we have color coded the technical questions. Every question which is colored in red, they are very important questions that, in our opinion, you should not get wrong. But questions which are in green, then those are questions that if you do get them right, it's a great impression of you, but if you do get them wrong, then as long as you can get everything else correct, then it's not really going to impact the overall view of your candidacy. So again, it does depend on the interviewer and the types of question that you're being asked. Another common question that I always get is, what if you don't know the answer? What should you do? And it depends. If you know half of the answer, then give the half of the answer which you do know and then ask for the rest of it. And it's a good idea because you never know, you might get the exact same question in another interview. So by asking for the remaining right answer, at least you know exactly how to answer it in the next round or in another interview. But if you completely have no idea how to answer the question, then I would not recommend just giving it your best shot, because you could be just waffling or just saying random stuff that's just going to waste the interviewer's time, and it could be taking time away from demonstrating the skills and qualities which you do have. So it's best to just say that you don't know and see if your interviewer is going to give you the right answer or not, or if they're just going to move on. Another common question that I get is, who is going to get the harder questions? When it comes to junior investment banking roles, and when I mean by junior roles, I mean the easy entry routes into investment banking, so analysts and associates, you're pretty much going to get similar questions. Now, you can argue that because associates are going to be managing analysts, they might get harder questions, but investment banking is really competitive to the point where analysts now have similar skill sets and knowledge base as an associate. So you can pretty much get similar type of questions, but we do have a higher expectation of associates than analysts. But nonetheless, you should prepare for the exact same type of question and not just take it easy because you're applying for an analyst or just because you're applying for an internship. You should pretty much prepare as if you're applying for an associate role, as if you're going to get every single question. And again, you don't want to risk an opportunity just because you didn't revise or you didn't know one question. Another common question that I get is, how do you know if your interview went well, specifically the technical section? And it's pretty much obvious. If you are able to correctly answer the vast majority of questions correctly without any prompt, without any help, then it's a good sign. But if you found that you had to constantly ask for help, or you were constantly guessing, or you had to say you don't know a couple of times, then it's usually a red flag, because it means your technical knowledge is not up to par. And there are a lot of candidates out there who have prepared pretty well for this section, so it's pretty much up to you how much you prepare for this. And the more effort, more time you put into this, the more successful you're going to be during your interviews. So for those of you that would like to see a full-length written article on all of the investment banking technical questions, then head on over to our website where you can see the full-length article where I pretty much have all the questions there. And for those of you that would like to see all of the 600 interview questions and answers for the interview, the application, the assessment centers, super days, and pretty much get everything else which you need to break into investment banking, then you might want to consider enrolling on the investment banking interview and recruitment guide. And if you would like to know exactly how to build financial models step by step, then take a look at our financial modeling course. As always, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.